Okay, so let's look at gimbal lock and how you overcome big gimbal lock. Look at the animation and see a pendulum with a joint at the center, a free joint. That joint can swing in every direction except it can't swing around the point of its own gimbal. So the point at the center has a restriction on its motion. The restriction, the point about which it is swinging, does not have a gimbal lock. How is that possible? What is that double-armed pendulum referencing in terms of its rotations? And how can it have total 360 XYZ motion? Because it creates its own inertial frame of reference through its limits of its external surface. So, a dot point of light, radius equals surface area, 0 squared. The dot point of expansion of surface tension. Take one ray, one fibre of light, and assess it like this. From the centre, that light exists for a duration. Light exists as expansion second squared. Therefore, that light expands. So take my one fibre of light and move it to the fullest extent that it can reach in that given duration of time. It reaches a limit. I'll come back to it. And what happens to that fibre? In the next, it's accelerating, infinite acceleration, reaches a limit, it snaps. At the center. Why at the center? Because it's subject to bending forces. Because it exists as a distance, potential distance, it's subject to potential bending at the center, the meter 4, and snaps. When it snaps, it creates spring. So the snap doesn't occur, it occurs as a coil. So it's a solid beam of light, fibre, in that, and it reaches this limit, it snaps into a spring. The fracture occurs as a coil, left-handed, chirality. The snap that occurs at the centre now is held, and it forms that two-arm pendulum. And it can swing in the arc of momentum, and the point, its limit, will cover the entire surface of the external surface of the sphere that is created. When it has completed an entire surface, it's created a frame of reference for itself. So it's built its own home, its own limit within its own reach. Can you see? And so now we can see that the point about which it rotates is the limit that it creates in its motion. So it creates its own inertial frame of reference. It is both the center and the outside at the same time. And therefore you just look at them differently. And you analyze the external surface using pi real, golden ratio pi. It's a series of straight lines. It's not a perfect circle. It's a circle, perfect, pi natural, stretched. So it's a series of straight lines. That's the external surface. And it's created from an elastic plastic modulus of the oil film that creates the bubble surface. And it has a tension. And that tension has a resistance to collapse. So the external surface is an infinite array of hexagons with a single pentagon about which this surface must turn. The mechanism of collapse of that is for those straight lines to go back to pi natural. The internal surface, you view it differently, collapses to the center first. So that the force, you can now see them in terms of two forces. A single place, a boundary, but with two forces. The collapse mechanism on the outside and the force inside inflating the external surface. So the internal surface collapses in a cardioid shape, like an apple shape with a pip at the top, to a heart shape, deeper, cardioid, full shape to the center, spindle torus, forces of collapse of the internal surface. Now it should just stop. Entropy says that's the end of the journey. No, vacuum energy remains. The collapse of the internal surface has created a vacuum inside the external surface. Because the external surface is taking time to collapse, because it has a strength of its material, it's not just going to stop, do that, but it has resists that straight line collapse for a moment, provided that the straight line collapse is slower than the internal surface collapse. The system repeats because there's vacuum energy inside the sphere of the external surface. If you take the force away, it still exists. There's a vacuum there, and that vacuum inverts the surface. So when the internal surface collapses to the center, vacuum energy remains, so it just inverts the surface and returns back where it was. So there is an internal surface as well, because if there was no internal surface, there'd be no external surface. It's so simple, so fucking simple, science. So give us the keys, and let the future start right now. Peace breaks out today when you understand that you've just been lied to, and that Dr. Levy, 1906, and the living force, it's ours, my species, ours. Follow the Rebel King.